You want to know what real evil looks like? Evelyn Carter stood in the snow, her voice barely above a whisper, staring at nothing but ash and twisted metal. It doesn't come with horns. It comes in a $1,000 suit carrying a briefcase, and it smiles at you right before it burns everything your children ever believed in. She paused, and nobody does a thing about it. If this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and follow along until the very last word. Drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The call came at 2:17 in the morning. Evelyn Carter was already awake. She had been awake for the better part of an hour, unable to sleep, which happened more and more these days ever since she'd turned 58, and her body decided that sleep was something it could no longer afford to give her in full. She was sitting at the small kitchen table in her private quarters at the back of Brighthaven Children's Home, both hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea that had long gone cold, staring at nothing in particular on the wall across from her. It was December 23rd, 2001. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve, and for the first time in 25 years of running this place, Evelyn Carter felt something close to hope. Real hope, not the watered-down kind she handed to the children every morning with their breakfast. The practiced smile, the bright eyes, of course things are going to be okay, that she had learned to manufacture with the same reliable consistency as a factory produces parts. This was different. This was something she could feel in the center of her chest, warm and solid, the way a good thing feels when you've worked long enough and hard enough to actually deserve it. She thought about Sophie Miller, 8 years old, blonde hair that was always slightly tangled, no matter how many times you brushed it, eyes so dark brown, they were almost black, and always watching, always reading the room, calculating exits, bracing for disappointment, the way a person braces for a punch they know is coming. Sophie had been through 4 foster placements in 3 years. 4 families who had looked at her and decided for one reason or another that she wasn't quite right for them. 4 times she had packed her belongings, what little she had, into a garbage bag because nobody had ever thought to buy her a proper suitcase, and she had arrived at a new place and tried to make herself small enough to disappear. She had stopped asking when she was coming home, because she had figured out with the brutal clarity of a child who has been failed too many times that she didn't have a home to come back to. Evelyn had started thinking of Sophie the first week the little girl arrived, when she found her awake at midnight, sitting on the floor of her room with her back against the door, not crying, not making a sound, just sitting there with her knees pulled to her chest. Sophie, Evelyn had said softly, kneeling down to her level, "What are you doing, sweetheart?" Sophie had looked at her with those dark, watchful eyes and said with complete seriousness, "Making sure no one takes my stuff while I sleep." Evelyn had sat down on that floor next to her. She'd stayed there for an hour. She didn't try to tell Sophie that no one was going to take her things. She didn't promise that this place was safe. She'd learned over 25 years that words like that fell hollow in the ears of a child who had been burned enough times. You couldn't talk a child out of their armor. You had to wait until they were ready to take it off themselves. But tonight, December 23rd, sitting at her cold kitchen table, Evelyn allowed herself to think about Sophie's face on Christmas morning. In the storage building out back, wrapped in paper, so bright it was almost gaudy, was a doll. Not just any doll. Evelyn had taken a photograph of Sophie from the hallway and driven 40 minutes to a specialty toy store in the next county, and she had found a doll with dark brown eyes and that same slightly messy quality to the hair that somehow never quite got fully tamed. She had paid more for it than she should have. She had wrapped it herself at her kitchen table with tape on her fingers and scissors that kept slipping, and she had printed Sophie's name on the tag in her best handwriting. There were 38 gifts for 38 children in that storage building. Bikes, winter coats, toys that lit up and made noise, books, games, small particular things that Evelyn had chosen for each child by thinking carefully about who they were, what they liked, what they had mentioned in passing when they didn't know anyone was listening. She had spent months on this. She had written letters to local businesses, called churches, knocked on doors, stood outside the grocery store in the November cold with a folding table and a donation jar. She had talked to parents and business owners and retired teachers and anyone who would listen to her explain why this year, this Christmas, had to be different. The town had been struggling, the mills closing, the layoffs, the quiet desperation that settles over a small town when the economic floor gives out beneath it, but people had given. Not because they were rich, because they weren't, and they remembered what it felt like and they gave anyway. Evelyn had cried exactly once during the whole campaign. Just once in her car in a parking lot after a particularly rough day when she'd gotten 3 rejections in a row and almost nothing in the donation jar. She let herself cry for about 4 minutes. Then she wiped her eyes, started the car, and drove to the next door on her list. 25 years had made her very good at picking herself back up. And now it was December 23rd, and tomorrow was Christmas Eve, and everything was ready. She allowed herself for one quiet moment at that kitchen table to feel the fullness of what they had built. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was Marcus Webb, one of the older volunteers, a retired firefighter in his 60s who often did a final walkthrough of the property before bed. Her stomach clenched before she even answered. Marcus. The sound on the other end of the line stopped her cold. I wasn't speaking. He was breathing the kind of broken, unsteady breathing a grown man does when he is trying very hard not to fall apart. Marcus, talk to me. What's happening? Evelyn. His voice came out fractured like something that had been dropped. You need to come outside right now. Don't. He stopped, steadied himself. Just come outside. She was already moving. She didn't grab a coat. She didn't put on shoes, just shoved her feet into the boots by the door. She crossed to the main corridor of the home at something between a fast walk and a run, not wanting to make enough noise to wake the children, but moving with every bit of urgency her body could generate. She pushed open the back door. The cold hit her like a wall, and then she saw it. The storage building was gone. Not damaged, not partially burned, gone. What remained was a structure of blackened beams against the night sky, smoke still curling upward into the freezing air. The whole thing reduced to something that barely resembled the place she had spent the last week preparing with such care. The snow around it had turned black. The heat had melted the nearest drifts, and then the cold had refrozen them into a strange, dark glass. Marcus was standing 10 feet away, his arms at his sides, just staring. Evelyn walked towards it. She didn't say anything. She didn't think she was capable of saying anything. She walked until the heat of what remained stopped her, and she stood there looking at the twisted metal that had once been bicycles. She could tell by the shapes, the curves of handlebars, the ghost of a wheel, and at the black nothing that had been boxes of gifts with children's names on them. She found Sophie's gift first, what was left of it. A small, melted shape in the debris, unrecognizable. The paper long gone, the box collapsed. The doll she had driven 40 minutes to buy. Evelyn! Marcus's voice was behind her. I smelled it from the front of the property. By the time I got back here, it was already... He couldn't finish. She turned around slowly. Her face, by her own description, later felt like it belonged to someone else, like a mask she was wearing and couldn't quite control. Did you call the fire department? They're on their way. I called 911 first, then you. She nodded, automatic, processing. The children, still asleep. All the main building staff have been quiet. Nobody's come out. Good. She was still nodding. We keep them inside. We don't let them see this tonight. Marcus, can you please stand at the back door and make sure nobody comes out until I say so? He looked at her with the kind of grief a person feels for someone else's loss, which is a particular and deep kind of grief. Evelyn. I'm fine, she said. The lie was so automatic she didn't even hear herself say it. She turned back to face the ruins of 38 children's Christmas morning. The fire trucks arrived 22 minutes later. 2 police cruisers came with them. The firefighters declared the structure a total loss within minutes of arriving. Nothing left to save, nothing left to salvage. The police officers walked the perimeter with flashlights, while Evelyn stood to the side, arms wrapped around herself in the cold she had only just now started to feel. Officer Dennis Trout, Silver Creek PD, early 40s, a man. Evelyn had known for years his daughter had taken swimming lessons at the Y, with a girl Evelyn used to care for, came to stand beside her with a look on his face that told her, before he opened his mouth, that this was going to get worse. Evelyn, I need to ask you some questions. I know, she said. When was the last time you checked on the storage building? Around 9 o'clock tonight. Everything was fine. I walked through to make sure the heater wasn't running too hot and checked that the door was locked. Who had a key? Myself, Marcus, and my night supervisor, Glennis Park. She paused. The key hangs on a hook in the main corridor. Anyone with access to the building technically could have... She stopped. You're not asking because you think it was accidental, are you? Trout was quiet for a moment. Then he said, The lock on that storage building. It wasn't burned, it was broken, clean break bolt cutter. And we're finding pore patterns in the debris, accelerant, probably gasoline. Evelyn heard the words. She heard them clearly with perfect comprehension. Her brain received them and understood exactly what they meant. And something happened in her chest that she would later struggle to describe. It wasn't rage exactly. It wasn't grief. It was something colder than both of those things and more focused, like a lens narrowing down to a single burning point. Victor Hawthorne, she said. Trout looked at her carefully. I'm not in a position to... Don't. Her voice came out with an edge she hadn't intended and didn't soften. Don't give me the official line, Dennis. You know what's been going on. You know he's been after this property for 2 years. You know what he said when I refused to sell. She paused. He told me that a place like this didn't belong in the future of Silver Creek. And then someone walked onto my property in the middle of the night and burned the Christmas morning of 38 children who have nothing. So please don't tell me you're not in a position. Trout held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said quietly, we'll need evidence. We can't act on... I know, she said. I know how it works. She also knew in that same moment how it didn't work. How money moved through the cracks of the law like water smoothing things over. Buying silence, making sure that men in $1,000 suits never had to stand in the snow, staring at what they had done. She had seen it before in 25 years of fighting were children whom nobody wanted to fight for, and she knew the particular helplessness of watching justice stall on the procedural machinery of a world that had been built in many important ways to protect the powerful from the consequences of their power. Victor Hawthorne had been trying to buy Brighthaven for 2 years. The property was prime real estate by Montana standards, a sprawling Victorian-era building on 2 acres at the edge of town, close enough to the mountains to be scenic, far enough from the industrial areas to be desirable. Hawthorne wanted to tear it down and build what his developers called a luxury resort community, the kind of place that would bring in wealthy out-of-staters and money in the illusion of prosperity while pushing out everything that had made Silver Creek an actual community of actual people. He had offered Evelyn a check with a number on it that genuinely surprised her. Not because it was generous, though it was, but because the number told her exactly how much he stood to make if she said yes. She had refused. He had come back with a bigger number. She had refused again. Then the letters from his lawyer started, alleging code violations that didn't exist, suggesting that Brighthaven's license could come under review, hinting in the precise language of people who are very good at threatening without technically threatening that life might become difficult for an institution that chose not to cooperate with the natural progress of development. Evelyn had kept every letter. She had shown them to her own lawyer, who had confirmed what she already knew. None of it would hold up, but it would cost money and time and energy to fight, and that was the point. And then 3 weeks before Christmas, at a town council meeting, where Hawthorne had been presenting his development plans, he had locked eyes with Evelyn across the room and said in a voice just loud enough for the people around them to hear, "Here, a place like that doesn't belong in the future of Silver Creek. Sooner or later, it'll have to go." Evelyn had looked right back at him and said, "Then I guess we'll be here to see how that turns out." She had thought she was ready for whatever he might try. She had not been ready for this. She stood in the snow until the last fire truck left, which was well after 4 in the morning. Marcus had gone inside. The police were gone. A thin, bitter wind had picked up, cutting through her coat, and she stood there anyway because she couldn't make herself go back inside yet. Couldn't face the corridor, couldn't face the door at the end of it where Sophie Miller was sleeping with no idea what the morning was going to look like. What do I tell them? She said it out loud to no one. To the ruins, maybe, to the cold air. What do I say to 38 children on Christmas morning when there's nothing left? She had no answer. She went inside. She sat at her kitchen table. The tea was still cold. She put her head in her hands, and for the second time in months, she let herself cry. But this time she didn't stop after 4 minutes. This time she let it go as long as it needed to go alone in her kitchen at 4 in the morning, because she was a woman who had given 25 years of her life to children who had been abandoned by the world, and someone had just taken a match to everything she had built for them, and she was allowed to fall apart for a little while before she had to put herself back together and go face them. When she was done, she washed her face. She made a fresh cup of tea. She sat back down at the table. and she thought very carefully about what she was going to do next. She thought about calling the state agency. She thought about calling the media. She thought about calling her lawyer. She thought about all the proper channels, all the official paths, all the procedures that she had spent 25 years learning to navigate. Then she thought about Victor Hawthorne in his warm office with his expensive lawyers. She thought about Caleb Ross, whose name she didn't yet know, but whose existence she was already certain of, the hand that had held the match, the hired instrument of a man who never got his own hands dirty. She thought about Dennis Trout saying we will need evidence, with that careful, apologetic look of a good man who knows the system he works inside. She looked at the clock. 4:41 a.m., December 24th. Christmas Eve. In a few hours, 38 children were going to wake up. She had to decide what kind of morning they were going to have. Glennis Park knocked on her door at 6 o'clock, just as the first gray light was starting to show through the kitchen window. Glennis was 53, a steady, sensible woman who had been at Brighthaven for 11 years, and who Evelyn trusted more than almost anyone on earth. She looked at Evelyn's face and said, "How bad?" "Everything," Evelyn said. "All of it." Glennis sat down. "Does Hawthorne know what he did?" "He ordered it, so yes." Glennis was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that Evelyn would think about for years. She said, "You know what those children are going to remember about this Christmas? Not the gifts, not the fire. They're going to remember what you did after. That's the only part they're going to carry." Evelyn looked at her. "So what are you going to do?" Glennis said. "After." Evelyn opened her mouth, closed it, looked out the window at the thin, pale light of a Montana winter morning and the dark shape at the edge of the property where the storage building had stood. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I'm not going to let him win." "That's a start," Glennis said. "That's always been your start." At 7:15, the children began waking up. Evelyn was in the main corridor when Sophie Miller came down the stairs. Sophie stopped at the bottom step and looked at her. Children are extraordinary readers of rooms. They can feel the temperature of an adult's emotional state with a precision that most adults lose as they grow older and learn to stop paying that close attention. Sophie Miller had been reading Rooms for Survival for most of her 8 years, and she read this one in about 3 seconds. Her face changed. "Something happened," she said. It wasn't a question. Evelyn crouched down to her level. She had promised herself she wasn't going to lie to the children. They deserved better than that, and they would see through it anyway. "Something did happen," she said carefully, "and I'm going to explain it to everyone this morning at breakfast. But I need you to do something for me first." Sophie watched her with those dark, steady eyes. "I need you to trust me," Evelyn said. "Not because I have an answer right now, but because I am going to find one. Can you do that?" A long pause. Sophie said, "You're not going to say everything's going to be okay." "I don't know yet if everything's going to be okay," Evelyn said. "What I know is that I'm not going to stop until I find a way to make it better. That's all I can promise you right now." Something shifted in Sophie's expression. Something very small and very specific, the way a person looks when they receive a truth instead of a comfortable lie, when they have braced themselves for a deflection and received honesty instead, and they don't quite know what to do with it yet. "Okay," Sophie said quietly. "Okay," Evelyn said. "Now let's go have breakfast." She took Sophie's hand. They walked together toward the dining room. And Evelyn Carter, who had given her whole adult life to children that nobody wanted, who had spent 25 years learning how to stand back up every time the world knocked her down, felt the small, warm weight of that little hand in hers and thought, "I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know what I'm fighting for." She would figure out the rest later. She didn't know yet what form the answer was going to take. She didn't know yet about the man 30 miles away who was watching the morning news with his coffee growing cold on the table beside him, or the sound his voice was going to make when he picked up his phone and said 4 words to a room full of people who would have followed him anywhere. She didn't know any of that yet. She just walked her children to breakfast and held on. Breakfast that morning was the quietest Evelyn had ever heard it. 38 children sitting at long tables, and the only sounds were forks touching plates and the occasional scrape of a chair, and the kind of careful, watchful silence that children produce when they know something is wrong but haven't been told what yet. They were waiting. Kids who had grown up in systems like this one learned to wait, learned to read the energy of a room before they committed to any reaction, because committing too early had cost them too many times. Evelyn stood at the front of the dining room and looked at their faces. She had rehearsed what she was going to say. Standing in the corridor before breakfast, she had put together sentences in her head, tested the weight of each word, tried to find the precise combination that would tell the truth without crushing something in these children that she had spent years trying to rebuild. She threw it all out. Something happened last night, she said. Something that wasn't fair and wasn't right, and I want you to hear it from me directly so you're not hearing it in pieces from each other later. The room didn't move. 38 pairs of eyes locked on her face. The storage building caught fire. Everything inside it was destroyed. The gifts that people worked very hard to put together for each of you, they're gone. Silence. Then a boy named Darnell, 11 years old, who sat near the end of the left table and who had asked Evelyn 3 separate times in the past month whether he was really going to get a bike this year. Darnell made a sound, not a cry, something below a cry, something that came from a place underneath language. The sound a person makes when they have been promised something for the first time in a long time, and then had it taken away before they could even hold it in their hands. Evelyn felt it go straight through her. I know, she said, and her voice held. She would not let it break in front of them. I know how unfair that is. You don't deserve that. None of you deserve that. And I want you to feel however you need to feel about it because you have every right. She paused. But I also want you to hear me when I tell you that I am not done. This is not the end of what I'm going to do for you. I don't have an answer for you right now, but I want you to know that I am working on one. From the middle of the room, Sophie Miller raised her hand. Quiet, deliberate. Evelyn nodded at her. Did someone do it on purpose? Sophie asked. The question landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Evelyn held the girl's gaze. The police are looking into that, she said carefully. That means yes, said Darnell from the end of the table. Evelyn didn't correct him. The morning moved forward, the way difficult mornings do, slowly in pieces, with long stretches of quiet punctuated by moments of emotion that rose and then settled back down like waves. Some of the younger children didn't fully understand. Some of the older ones understood too well and went very still and very internal, retreating to whatever private place they had built inside themselves for exactly this kind of moment. Glennis circulated through the room with coffee for the adults and quiet words for the children. Steady as a lighthouse, and Evelyn was grateful for her in a way she didn't have words for. By 9 o'clock, Evelyn was back in her office with the door closed, her phone on the desk in front of her. She had calls to make. The proper calls. The official ones. She called the state licensing office and left a message. She called the local news station because the story needed to be public. Sunlight was the only disinfectant available to someone with no money and no lawyers. She called 2 of her board members. She called her attorney, a woman named Patricia Cho, who had a quiet, methodical voice and who listened to the whole account before saying, "What Trout told you about the accelerant in the lock, did he put that in writing?" "Not yet." "Get it in writing. Everything from this point forward goes in writing. Every conversation, every interaction, everything. If Hawthorne did this, he's going to try to clean up behind himself very fast, and we need a paper trail." A pause. "Evelyn, I have to be honest with you. Even with everything you've described, the threats, the history, the timing, connecting him to this legally is going to take time we may not have." "I know. He has a lot of resources." "I know that too. So what's your plan?" Evelyn looked out her office window at the snow. "I'm working on it," she said, which was what she always said when she didn't have one yet. She hung up and sat for a moment, and then she did something she had told herself she wasn't going to do. She pulled up Victor Hawthorne's number in her contacts. She sat there looking at it. She was going to call him. Not because she thought it would accomplish anything legal. Not because she expected a confession or an apology or any response other than the kind of smooth practice deflection that very rich men are very good at producing. She was going to call him because she needed him to know that she knew. She needed to hear his voice when he found out she knew. And maybe underneath all of that, she needed to say out loud to the actual person what he had done, because carrying it alone in her chest was starting to feel like something she couldn't sustain. She pressed call. 3 rings, 4. Then the line clicked open. Victor Hawthorne. His voice was exactly what it always was. Smooth, measured. The voice of a man who had never once in his adult life been caught off balance by a phone call, because men like Victor Hawthorne didn't get caught off balance. They had people for that. "It's Evelyn Carter," she said, a beat. Very short, almost undetectable. "Evelyn, this is unexpected. Merry Christmas." The words hit her like a slap. Someone burned down my storage building last night, she said. Everything inside it, every gift those children were going to receive this morning. Gone. I heard about that, he said. And the smoothness of it, the casualness, the complete absence of surprise told her everything she had already known. Terrible thing. I hope no one was hurt. You know exactly what happened, she said. A pause. Longer this time, deliberate. Evelyn, I understand you're upset. I want you to listen to me. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by how steady it was. I know what you did, and I know why, and I want you to understand something very clearly. You didn't scare me. You didn't break me, and you're not getting this property. He let the silence sit for a moment. When he spoke again, the warmth was gone, not replaced by anger, by something colder and more considered. You should think very carefully about what you are implying, and he said. That kind of accusation without evidence, without anything to back it up, could create significant problems for you, legally. Noted, she said. I'm going to pretend this conversation didn't happen, he said, because I think you're speaking from grief right now, and I have no interest in holding that against you. How generous, she said. Get some rest, Evelyn. It's Christmas Eve. And he hung up. She sat there holding the phone. Her hand was shaking slightly. She hadn't noticed until just now. She set the phone down on the desk and pressed both palms flat against the surface and breathed 4 slow counts, in 4 slow counts, out the way she'd learned to do in her 40s, when the job started generating more adrenaline than her body knew how to process efficiently. He had done it. He had burned those children's Christmas morning, and he was going to walk away from it, and he knew it, and he just told her so with the most polished, civilized language she'd ever heard used to describe complete impunity. The proper channels were not going to be enough. She knew it with absolute clarity, sitting in her office with her hands pressed flat on the desk and the cold light coming through the window. The proper channels worked for people who already had power. They worked slowly and expensively, and for the duration of their slowness and expense, men like Victor Hawthorne kept building and buying and maneuvering, and by the time the paperwork caught up with what they had already done 3 more things and restructured the paperwork around all of them. She knew this. 25 years had taught her this. So she sat and she thought for a long time. And then she remembered something she had heard from a woman named Dolores Kaminsky, who ran the laundromat on Fitch Street and who was one of the most reliably informed people in Silver Creek, which is a particular kind of power that laundromat owners in small towns have always possessed. Dolores had told her back in October about a group of men who had shown up at a fundraiser for a local family whose house had flooded, men who had ridden in on motorcycles and donated more than anyone expected, and then left without asking for thanks or recognition. Who were they? Evelyn had asked. Hell's Angels chapter, Dolores had said. Out of the old industrial district 30 miles south. Don't let the reputation fool you. Those boys take care of people. Evelyn had filed this. The way you file things away that you don't think you'll need, but something in the back of your mind decides to keep anyway. She thought about it now. She pulled open her desk drawer where she kept a small address book. The physical kind, a habit left over from before everything went digital, and she paged through it until she found the number that Dolores had given her weeks ago when she'd mentioned offhand that she'd become friendly with a woman whose brother was in the group. Just in case, Dolores had said, those men know this town in ways the police don't. Evelyn looked at the number for a long moment. She thought about what she was doing. She thought about 25 years of doing things the right way and where it had gotten her this morning. She picked up the phone. The number rang twice. A woman answered, not the person she needed, but she left her name and said it was urgent and gave her number and said, please, that was all, please. She did not expect a call back quickly. She did not expect much of anything. It was a long shot thrown from a place of desperation, and she knew it, and she sat back in her chair and looked at her cold office and let herself sit with the uncomfortable reality of not knowing what happened next. The callback came in 47 minutes. A man's voice, low, not unfriendly, but cautious in the way of someone who receives unexpected calls from strangers and has learned to take the measure of a person quickly. This is Jack Dalton. I was told you needed to reach someone. Evelyn straightened in her chair. Mr. Dalton, my name is Evelyn Carter. I run Bright Haven Children's Home here in Silver Creek. I don't know if you've seen the news this morning. I have, he said. She paused. You know what happened? I know what they're saying happened, he said. What do you need? She had expected more preamble, more caution, maybe more skepticism. The directness caught her slightly off guard, and she found herself grateful for it in a way she hadn't anticipated. I need someone who knows how to find things, she said. The police have told me what they found evidence of arson, a broken lock accelerant. They know what it looks like, but they don't have enough to move on the man I believe is responsible. And that man has lawyers and money and all the time in the world to make the evidence go away before anyone can get to it. She paused. I was told you know this town in ways that other people don't. A silence on the other end, not awkward, thoughtful. Victor Hawthorne, Jack Dalton said. It wasn't a question. Evelyn's grip on the phone tightened. How do you know that name? Because people like Victor Hawthorne always want the same things, he said. And people who want those things leave the same kind of damage behind them. I've seen it before. Another pause. What makes you think I can help you? I don't know that you can, she said honestly, but I know the official channels aren't moving fast enough. And those children are going to wake up tomorrow morning with nothing, and someone has to do something that isn't just... She stopped herself, took a breath. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. I'm asking you to help me find the truth before it disappears. The silence on the other end stretched out long enough that she began to think she had misjudged the call entirely. Then Jack Dalton said, I'm going to put you on hold for 2 minutes. He did. She sat there in her office, listening to nothing, and thought about how her life had brought her to a moment where her best available option was a phone call to a biker club and a 2-minute hold. She almost laughed. Jack came back on the line. I want to understand something before I say yes to anything. Those children, how many of them are there? 38, she said. And the youngest? We have a 4-year-old. Her name is Maya. A beat. And the gifts, everything was destroyed. Everything, bikes, coats, toys. I had a gift with every child's name on it. I'd spent months putting it together. Her voice held. Barely. A man paid someone to light a match, and in about 15 minutes he erased Christmas morning for 38 children who already have almost nothing. Something changed in the quality of the silence on the other end. She couldn't have described it precisely. It was the kind of thing you felt more than heard, a shift in the atmospheric pressure of a conversation, the moment when something moves from consideration to decision. All right, Jack Dalton said. Just that, all right. What does that mean, she asked. It means we'll look into it, he said. Don't call Hawthorne again. Don't say anything to the police about this conversation. Just go take care of your kids. I'll be in touch. He hung up. Evelyn set the phone down. She sat very still for a moment, trying to determine exactly what she had just set in motion. She wasn't sure. She wasn't sure at all. But for the first time since she had stood in the snow looking at the ruins of everything she'd built for those children, she felt something other than helplessness. Not hope exactly. Not yet. Something more raw than hope, like the feeling of a door opening in a dark room. You don't know what's on the other side. You just know it's open, and that's different from before. She went back out into the corridor to find her children. 30 miles south, in the kind of building that looks from the outside like it might house auto parts or heavy machinery, and from the inside reveals itself to be something more complicated. Walls covered in patches and photos, the accumulated artifacts of men who have lived hard lives and chosen to live them together. Jack Dalton stood in front of the television with his coffee mug in one hand and the phone in the other, and he didn't move for a long moment. The news was still running the story. A reporter standing outside Bright Haven in the morning culled the blackened frame of the storage building, visible in the background, footage they'd shot at first light. The crawler at the bottom of the screen reading arson suspected in Christmas Eve fire at local orphanage. 8 men sat around the long table in the main room. A couple more leaned against the walls. They had been there when the news came on, and they had watched it without speaking, which was its own kind of language, among men who had known each other long enough to understand each other's silences. Big Roy, 56 years old, and carrying 260 pounds of muscle that had gradually been redistributing itself to more convenient locations, set down his mug and said, "Somebody actually did that." It wasn't a question either. "Somebody did," Jack said. "On Christmas Eve," said a younger man named Cody, 29, who had the kind of face that made people underestimate him until they'd spent about 3 minutes in a room with him. To kids. To kids, Jack confirmed. The room was quiet again. Jack looked at the faces around him. Men he had ridden with for years. Men who had complicated histories and arrest records and reputations that preceded them into every room they entered. Men who the people of Silver Creek crossed the street to avoid when they saw them coming. Men who had a collective reputation for danger that was, like most reputations, partly earned and mostly myth. Men who had, each of them in their own way, in their own time, been the child that nobody showed up for. He knew their stories because they had told each other those stories over years of long rides and late nights, and the particular intimacy that develops between the people who choose each other as family when the family they were born into didn't quite work out. Jack knew without having to say it that every man in that room was thinking about a specific moment in their own past. A Christmas, a birthday, a school play, a hospital room, a courtroom. The particular shape of the moment when they had understood for the first time that they were on their own. He set his mug down on the table. "We're going to find out who did this," he said. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a rallying cry. It was just a fact stated in the same tone he would use to announce that rain was coming. "And when we find out, we're going to make sure it doesn't disappear. That's it. That's what we're doing today." Nobody objected. Nobody even looked surprised. Big Roy pushed his chair back and stood up, which in his case was a process that involved some architectural rearrangement of significant mass. "Where do we start?" "We start with who Hawthorne uses for dirty work," Jack said. "He doesn't do it himself. Men like that never do. He has someone local, someone who knows how to handle a lock in a can of gasoline and how to stay quiet after." He looked around the room. "Who do we know who matches that description?" The men looked at each other. Then Cody said, "There's a guy, Caleb Ross, used to work demolition before he got fired for showing up wrong too many times. Does odd jobs now, the wrong kind of odd jobs." He paused. "I heard he was seen out near Hawthorne's property office a couple weeks back." "You heard from who?" Jack said. "Tommy Briggs at the garage. Said Caleb was driving a truck he didn't recognize and had more cash than usual for someone who supposedly wasn't working." Jack nodded, slow, processing. "Where does Caleb spend his days?" he said. "When he's got money," Cody said. "Rucker's, the bar on Route 9. Jack looked at the clock on the wall. 10:47 a.m. Christmas Eve. "All right," he said. He picked up his phone. He called one number. The man who answered was a former accountant turned biker who had a particular gift for following financial threads through the digital spaces where money tried to make itself invisible. "Eddie," Jack said, "I need you to start pulling on something for me. Hawthorne Development, Silver Creek. Looking for any recent cash transfers, anything that doesn't match their normal pattern in the last 30 days. Can you do that?" "Give me a few hours," Eddie said. "You've got two," Jack said, and hung up. He turned back to the room. "Big Roy, Cody, you're with me. The rest of you'd, I want eyes on Hawthorne's property office and his personal residence. Nobody goes in, nobody approaches you, just watch and you tell me who's moving and where." He paused. "And somebody call Tommy Briggs at the garage and find out everything he knows about the truck Caleb was driving." The room began moving. The particular efficient movement of men who have learned how to work together under pressure, who have been in enough complicated situations to know that speed matters, but so does precision, and who understand that the difference between justice and chaos is the difference between knowing what you're doing and why versus just reacting to your anger. Jack walked to the far end of the room and stood for a moment by himself, looking at nothing, turning something over in his mind. He had grown up in a group home, not Silver Creek, a different state, a different era, but the same essential architecture, a building full of children who had been failed by the people who were supposed to protect them, who had learned to manage their own expectations down to the smallest possible size so that the disappointments were survivable. He remembered a Christmas morning when he was 9. He remembered being told there were gifts for everyone, and the way that announcement had lit something up in him that he'd spent a long time learning not to let light up. And he remembered the morning itself, the confusion, the long wait, the explanation that came eventually garbled and adult and unsatisfying about how the donations hadn't quite materialized the way they'd expected. He remembered watching the other kids pretend they didn't care. He remembered pretending he didn't care. He picked up his jacket. He didn't make speeches about his past. That wasn't how he was built. He had done the work he had done in his life for reasons that he kept mostly to himself, and he would continue to do it the same way. But he thought, walking toward the door, there is a little girl in Silver Creek right now who is sitting in a building with 37 other children, And she woke up this morning expecting something and got nothing. And the man responsible is sitting in a warm office somewhere counting his money and expecting to get away with it. And somewhere in that building, Evelyn Carter is trying to hold 38 children together with her bare hands. Jack pushed the door open. "Let's go," he said. The bike started. The sound of them filled the cold air, that particular unmistakable sound that announced itself in advance and filled the spaces between buildings and traveled for distances that always seemed slightly further than the physics should allow. And they pulled out of the lot in a column heading north towards Silver Creek, and Jack rode at the front with the cold cutting across his face and his mind running through everything he knew and everything he needed to find out. I didn't know yet exactly what he was riding toward, but he knew what he was riding for, and that was enough to start. 3 miles outside Silver Creek, his phone buzzed in his jacket. He pulled off the road, the others falling in behind him without question, and he answered. It was Tommy Briggs from the garage. "The truck," Tommy said without preamble. "I wrote the plate down because something felt off. Ran it. It's registered to a shell company called Delta Property Services." Jack was very still. "Delta Property Services," he said. "Is that a Hawthorne company?" "It's not in his name," Tommy said, "but the registered address is 14 Commerce Drive, Suite 201. Jack knew that address. It was the address of Hawthorne Development. He sat on his bike in the cold with the wind coming off the mountain and his heart doing something very specific and very controlled inside his chest. And he thought, there it is. There it is. He put the phone away. He looked back at the line of bikes behind him. Big Roy Cody and 6 others, their breath making small clouds in the cold air, all of them watching him waiting. "We've got a thread," he said, "and I know where it leads." He started his bike. They rode. Rucker's Bar on Route 9 was the kind of place that existed in every small American town, not because anyone particularly wanted it there, but because a certain kind of need creates its own supply. It opened at 10 in the morning and rarely had trouble filling seats by 11, which told you everything you needed to know about the economic condition of the people who depended on it. Caleb Ross was on his 3rd drink when Jack Dalton walked through the door. Jack knew it was him immediately, not because he'd seen him before he hadn't, but because Caleb Ross had the particular posture of a man who was trying very hard to look like he wasn't thinking about something. Hunched slightly forward over the bar, both hands around his glass, eyes tracking the television mounted in the corner without actually watching it. The posture of a man whose mind was somewhere else entirely and whose body was doing its best impersonation of casual. Jack sat down 2 stools away. He didn't introduce himself. He ordered a coffee. The bartender gave him a look that suggested coffee was not the primary product of this establishment, but produced it anyway, and he wrapped both hands around the mug and sat quietly for a moment. Cody had come in behind him and taken a seat at a table near the door. Big Roy was outside. The arrangement was not accidental. Caleb glanced at him, looked away, glanced again. "You're one of them," Caleb said, not aggressive. Something closer to resigned, the way a man sounds when he's been half expecting something bad, and it has finally arrived. "Hell's Angels." "That's right," Jack said. Caleb looked back at his drink, his hands tightened around the glass. "I don't want any trouble." "Neither do I," Jack said. "I want a conversation, that's all. I don't have anything to say to you." "That's okay," Jack said. "I'll do most of the talking. You just let me know when something I say is wrong." He paused. 2 nights ago, someone broke a padlock off a storage building at Brighthaven Children's Home and poured accelerant and lit it on fire. The fire destroyed every gift that 38 kids were going to receive on Christmas morning. He looked at Caleb. "You want to tell me where you were that night?" Caleb's jaw tightened. His eyes stayed on his glass. "Home," he said. "Asleep." "Alone?" "Yeah, alone." "That's too bad," Jack said. "Alibi would have been useful." He took a sip of his coffee. "Here's the thing, Caleb. We already know about the truck, the one registered to Delta Property Services that you were seen driving 3 weeks ago. And we know Delta Property Services operates out of 14 Commerce Drive, Suite 201, which is a Hawthorne Development address." He set the mug down carefully. "We're not the police. We're not here to arrest you. But here's what I need you to understand. What happened to those kids is on the news right now. And this town is angry in a way that I have not personally seen this town angry before. And the only question that remains is who exactly that anger is going to land on." Caleb said nothing. His breathing had changed. Jack could hear it slightly faster, slightly shallower, the involuntary physiological response of a man whose body had decided that this conversation was a threat and was beginning to manage it the way bodies manage threats. Victor Hawthorne gave you money, Jack said, and you did what he paid you to do. I understand that. I understand being broke enough that someone waves cash at you and you stop asking questions about what the job actually is. I've known men who made that calculation. I've made some bad calculations myself. He paused. But here's what I know about men like Hawthorne. When the heat comes, and the heat always comes, Caleb, they don't share it. They redirect it. You know what that means for someone in your position. Caleb's knuckles were white around the glass. It means, Jack said quietly, that if someone goes down for this, it won't be him. His lawyers will make very sure of that. It'll be the man who actually held the can of gasoline, and that man will be sitting in a cell somewhere while Victor Hawthorne drinks champagne at his resort and doesn't think about you even once. A long silence. The television in the corner was showing a rerun of something cheerful and Christmas-themed that had no relationship whatsoever to the temperature of this conversation. Then Caleb Ross put his face in his hands. It was such a sudden, complete gesture, the collapse of someone who had been holding something up for too long and simply ran out of the strength to keep holding it, that for a moment Jack just watched him without speaking. When Caleb looked up, his eyes were red, not from crying exactly, from the specific strain of a man who is fighting something inside himself and losing. I didn't know it was kids, he said. He told me it was an insurance situation. He said the woman who ran the place was in on it, that it was her building her stuff, and she wanted it burned so she could collect. He stopped. His voice had developed a crack in it. I didn't know about the gifts. I didn't know about... He stopped again, looked at his drink. I've got a daughter, he said. She's 9. Jack held the silence for a moment. Then you understand, he said finally, what you took from those kids. The words landed without embellishment, clean and precise, and exactly as heavy as they needed to be. Caleb received them with a full-body flinch, a physical response to moral weight, the kind of reaction that happens in people who still have a conscience, who have done something wrong and know it, and have not yet figured out how to make themselves stop knowing it. What do you want from me? Caleb said. Everything, Jack said. When Hawthorne contacted you, how he paid you, what he told you. I want it all, and I want it on record. Caleb shook his head. He'll bury me. He'll try to bury you anyway, Jack said. The only question is whether you go down alone or whether you take him with you. He leaned forward slightly. And there's something else you might want to consider. Brighthaven Children's Home is still standing. The land it sits on is still what Hawthorne wants. If burning those gifts didn't make Evelyn Carter leave, and it didn't, what do you think comes next? Caleb looked up sharply. He's not done, Jack said. Men like that are never done until someone stops them. And the only thing that stops them is a consequence they didn't pay enough to avoid. He paused. You can be that consequence, Caleb. Or you can be the man who let 38 kids wake up with nothing on Christmas morning and then walked away from the only chance he had to make it right. The silence that followed was different from the ones that had preceded it. This one had a texture to it, the texture of something being decided. Jack had been in enough rooms, with enough people, at enough critical junctures to recognize the feel of a moment when someone is standing at the edge of a decision they can't walk back from. He waited. Big Roy appeared at the doorway, caught Jack's eye, and gave a small shake of his head. Nothing outside to report. Jack acknowledged it without looking away from Caleb. Caleb drained the last of his drink, set the glass down, and said, he called me on the 18th, a number I'd never seen before, burner probably, offered me $3,000 cash for a job he described as property damage. He used those exact words, property damage, like he'd rehearsed it, said he'd leave the money in an envelope at the front desk of the Silver Creek Motor Inn under my name, and I should pick it up before I did the job. He paused. The envelope was there. I picked it up. $3,000 in cash. Jack felt the thread tighten in his hands. The burner number, he said. Do you still have it? On my phone. I'm going to need that number. Caleb nodded. Slow, the nod of a man who has jumped off something and is now in the air past the point of reversing the decision. Beginning the process of understanding that falling doesn't have to mean destruction if you land right. There's one more thing, Caleb said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, navigated to something, Then he turned the screen toward Jack. I recorded the second call, the one after where he confirmed I'd done it and told me to stay quiet. I don't know why I did it. I think part of me knew. He stopped. I think part of me knew that what I did was wrong, and I wanted some kind of insurance. Jack looked at the phone, at the audio file icon on the screen. He was very still. Then he said, "Play it." Caleb pressed play. The voice that came out of the phone's speaker was smooth and measured, and immediately recognizable as the voice of a man who was accustomed to giving instructions that other people carried out without question. Victor Hawthorne's voice said, "It's done, I take it." Caleb's voice on the recording said, "Yeah." Hawthorne, "Good. And there were no complications. No one saw you." Caleb, "No one saw me." Hawthorne, "Excellent. The rest of the arrangement stands as discussed. 30 days, then you'll receive the balance. In the meantime, I'd suggest you spend some time being somewhere visible. Have a drink with someone. Be remembered." A pause. He paused, and then Caleb's voice, slower now, like a man who is hearing something out loud that he has been trying not to think about. "Those were kids' gifts in there." A beat on the recording, the smallest beat, the length of a man recalibrating. Then Hawthorne's voice, "It's a business decision, Caleb. Try not to be sentimental about it." The recording ended. The bar was very quiet. The bartender, who had been making a show of polishing glasses at the far end of the counter, had stopped polishing. He was looking at the bar top, very still, the way people get when they have heard something they weren't supposed to hear and are trying to make themselves invisible inside the information. Jack looked at Caleb for a long moment. "That he said is everything we need." He took out his own phone. He called Eddie. "Tell me you have something," he said. "I have something," Eddie said. He sounded slightly wired, the focused energy of a man who has been pulling threads for 2 hours and has just found the one that unravels the whole sweater. "Delta Property Services made a cash withdrawal on December 18th, $3,000. And there's a second transaction scheduled, flagged in their system as a contractor payment for 30 days out. Another $2,000. The withdrawal was authorized by a signatory on the Delta account." A pause. "The signatory is a woman named Margaret Forsyth. She's Hawthorne's personal assistant. Can you document all of that?" "Already doing it. Screenshots, transaction records, the whole chain. Give me another hour and I'll have a package you could hand to a prosecutor." Jack looked at Caleb. "Make it 45 minutes, he said. "And Eddie, good work." He hung up. He looked at Caleb Ross sitting on his bar stool with the hollow-eyed look of a man who has just handed over the only piece of leverage he had and is now waiting to see if he made the right call. "What happens to me?" Caleb said. "You're going to talk to the police," Jack said, "voluntarily, with that recording, and you're going to tell them everything you told me in the same order and with the same detail. When you walk in there, you ask to speak to Officer Dennis Trout specifically, and you tell him that you have information about the Brighthaven arson and that you want to cooperate. And Hawthorne's lawyers will have a much harder time making a recording disappear than they would have making your testimony disappear," Jack said. "A voice is a voice. That's him, on tape, calling it a business decision." He paused. "Those lawyers are going to earn their money today, but they're going to earn it defending someone who put himself on record ordering arson against a children's home on Christmas Eve. That's a harder case to walk back than most." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Then will you go with me to the police station?" Jack looked at him steadily. He thought about it honestly, the complications it would add, the questions it would raise, the attention it would draw to the club that they generally preferred not to have. Then he thought about Evelyn Carter at her kitchen table at 4 in the morning, with her hands pressed flat on the desk. He thought about 38 children waking up to nothing. "I thought about Victor Hawthorne on the phone saying try not to be sentimental about it." "Yeah," Jack said, "I'll go with you." He called Cody over and said 3 sentences to him quietly. Then Cody walked out and Jack heard the sound of a bike starting. Big Roy came in from the cold, stomping snow off his boots, and Jack said, "We're taking a drive to the police station. Call the others and have them sit on Hawthorne's office building. Nobody leaves that building without us knowing about it." Big Roy raised his eyebrows a fraction, not because he was surprised, more because he was confirming he had understood correctly. "Hawthorne's office," Jack said. "Eyes only. Nobody does anything." "Got it," Roy said. They walked out. The cold hit them, and Caleb pulled his jacket tighter and looked at the line of motorcycles in the lot with an expression that someone less experienced in reading people might have mistaken for fear. Jack recognized it for what it actually was, the particular vertigo of a person who has made a significant decision and is only now beginning to feel the altitude of it. "You all right?" Jack said. "No," Caleb said honestly. "Good," Jack said. "That means you understand what you did. That's the only starting place that matters." They drove to the Silver Creek Police Department. Jack rode. Caleb followed in his truck, which told Jack something important about the man. He could have gotten in that truck and driven in any other direction, and the few minutes head start might have been enough. He chose not to. People were more complicated than their worst moments, and Jack had learned long ago not to confuse a person with the worst thing they had ever done. Officer Dennis Trout was at his desk when they came through the door, and his face went through several distinct expressions in rapid succession. Recognition of Jack, confusion about Jack's presence, recognition of what that presence likely meant, and then he stood up. "Mr. Dalton," he said, careful, professional. "This is unexpected." "I have something for you," Jack said. "This man is Caleb Ross. He has information about the Brighthaven arson that he wants to share voluntarily. He also has a recording." He paused. "I'd suggest you listen to the recording first." Trout looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back at him. Then Caleb took out his phone and set it on the desk. Trout listened to the recording. His expression, which had started neutral and professional, moved through something during those 90 seconds that Jack watched with interest, not satisfaction, not yet, but something close to it. The specific expression of a man who has been waiting for a piece that fits and has just been handed it. When the recording ended, Trout looked up. His eyes went to Jack first, then to Caleb. "When did you receive this call?" he said. "December 23rd, Caleb said, "the night after." "And the first contact when Hawthorne approached you about the job?" "December 18th. By phone. I have the number." Trout sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, doing the kind of internal calculation that detectives do when a case that was going cold suddenly develops a temperature. Then he looked at Jack. "How did you find him?" he said. "People talk," Jack said. "We know this town." Trout appeared to consider several responses and decided on, "I'm going to need you to wait outside while I take Mr. Ross's statement." "That's fine," Jack said. He walked back out to the lobby. Big Roy was there leaning against the wall with the patient stillness of a large man who has learned that patience is the most efficient use of a large body. They stood together and didn't say much because there wasn't much to say. 40 minutes passed. Jack's phone buzzed. It was Eddie. The financial documentation was complete. A file transaction records account information. The full paper trail from Delta Property Services to Caleb Ross was ready to be delivered. Jack texted back an address and said, "Bring it here," and Eddie said, "On my way." Jack called Evelyn. She answered on the second ring, and he could hear in the first syllable of her hello that she had been waiting for the phone to ring and was both terrified and desperate for it to do so. "It's Jack Dalton," he said. "We found him. The man Hawthorne paid. He's talking to the police right now, voluntarily, and he has a recording." A silence on her end, then a recording of what Hawthorne, confirming the job was done in his own voice. He paused, calling it a business decision. Another silence, longer. When Evelyn Carter spoke again, her voice had a quality in it that Jack couldn't quite name, something between grief and relief and fury and exhaustion, all of it compressed into a single register. Like a person who has been holding a tremendous weight and has just been told they can set it down and doesn't quite believe it yet and is afraid to let go in case the permission is withdrawn. "Is it enough?" she said. "Is it actually enough?" "It's enough to move on," Jack said. "Whether it's enough for a conviction, that's for the lawyers and the DA. But it's enough to make him unhappy for a very long time and to make it very difficult for him to do what he's been trying to do with your property." He paused. "It's enough that he is not going to walk away from this clean. That much I can promise you." She let out a breath, long and slow, the breath of someone who has been holding it for hours. "The children," she said quietly. "It's still Christmas Eve. They still don't have anything." Jack was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "I'm working on that part too." He hung up and turned to Big Roy. "I need to make some calls," he said. "How many?" Jack looked out on him. "All of them," he said. "Every contact we have. Every business owner who owes us a favor. Every person who's told us to call if we ever needed anything. Every toy, drive, every church, every warehouse that might have anything useful." He looked at his watch. It was 1:14 in the afternoon. We have until tomorrow morning, and I need enough to cover 38 kids. Big Roy stared at him. Then a slow grin spread across his face, the grin of a man who has been looking for something worth doing and has just found it. Brother, he said, we are going to need more trucks. Jack smiled for the first time all day. It was a small smile, and it didn't last long, but it was real. Start calling, he said. Roy pulled out his phone. Inside the police station, Caleb Ross was still talking. Dennis Trout was still writing, and somewhere across town in an office with expensive furniture and an even more expensive view, Victor Hawthorne was almost certainly sitting at his desk with no idea that the morning he had carefully arranged the frightened woman, the ruined gifts, the property that would eventually come loose from its owner's grasp had come entirely undone. He didn't know yet about the recording. I didn't know about Caleb's decision in a bar on Route 9. He didn't know about the financial documentation that Eddie was driving to the Silver Creek Police Department in a manila envelope at that very moment. He didn't know about the 47 phone calls that Jack Dalton was about to make. He didn't know about any of it. And Jack thought, climbing back onto his bike in the police station parking lot with the cold air cutting across his face, that there was something profoundly satisfying about the specific moment before a man like Victor Hawthorne found out. The last thing Hawthorne would ever expect, the thing he genuinely could not have anticipated, because it existed entirely outside the map of his world, was that the instrument of his downfall would turn out to be a biker club he had never thought about once in his entire life, and a woman who refused to stop fighting, and a man named Caleb Ross who had in the end chosen correctly. Jack started his engine. He had a Christmas to rebuild. The first call Jack made was to a man named Pete Okafor, who owned a sporting goods warehouse on the south side of the county, and who owed Jack a favor that went back 3 years to a night when Pete's son had gotten into a situation that could have ended his future entirely, and Jack had intervened in a way that required no paperwork and left no record. Pete answered on the first ring. Jack, Merry Christmas. Pete, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me about what you can actually do, not what you wish you could do. Can you do that? A pause. What's happening? You've seen the news today. Bright Haven Children's Home. The fire. Yeah, my wife's been crying about it all morning. I'm putting together a Christmas for 38 kids tonight. I need bikes, Pete. Whatever you have in that warehouse. Kids' sizes, I'm talking a range youngest, is 4, oldest is 15. Whatever you've got, I need it. The silence on Pete's end lasted exactly 4 seconds. I've got 11 kids' bikes on the floor, Pete said, and I've got 8 more in back that came in last week for the spring inventory. 19 total. They're yours. Don't tell me what it costs. I already know what it costs, and I don't care. Pete, Jack, my son is alive and employed and getting married next spring because of you. 19 bikes. Come get them whenever you're ready. And I'm going to call 2 other guys while you're on the phone with me, Dave Kowalski at the toy distributor in Flathead County, and my brother-in-law, Ray, who runs the sports equipment place in Billings. Between the 3 of us, we can probably cover a lot of ground. Jack closed his eyes for a half a second. He had not expected it to go this fast. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, Pete said. Just make sure those kids have a Christmas. He hung up and immediately dialed the next number on his mental list. A church pastor named Gerald Hutchins, who ran the largest congregation in the county and who Jack had a relationship with that surprised everyone who knew about it, because the surface appearance of a biker and a Baptist minister suggested very little common ground. And the reality was that they had been quietly collaborating on community projects for 6 years, each respecting what the other brought to the table. Gerald picked up and said, Jack, in the tone of a man who has also been watching the news and has also been waiting for something actionable to present itself. Gerald, I need coats, children's sizes, winter coats. We collected 400 pounds of winter clothing last month for the holiday drive, Gerald said immediately. Most of it hasn't been distributed yet. I have children's coats, hats, gloves, boots. How many children? 38, ages 4 to 15. I can cover that and then some. Do you need me to bring them somewhere? Not yet. I'll call you with a location and a time. Jack, Gerald's voice shifted slightly, dropped a register, took on the particular weight of a man who is about to say something real. What you're doing right now, I want you to know what you're doing right now matters. Just keep your phone on, Jack said and hung up. Big Roy was watching him from across the parking lot, with his phone also to his ear and a look on his face that translated roughly to, We are building momentum, and I can feel it. Jack pointed at him with 2 fingers. Keep going, and Roy nodded and kept talking into his phone. Jack called Cody next. Where are you? Still watching Hawthorne's office. Nothing's moved. Though, Cody paused. About 20 minutes ago, a black town car pulled up and 2 men in suits went in. They didn't look like normal business visitors. Lawyers, Jack said. That's what I thought. Good. That means the news about Caleb reached him. He knows. Jack felt a cold satisfaction settle in. He's not running. He's lawyering up, which means he's going to try to fight it from inside. That's fine. Let him fight. How's the rest of the team? Jimmy and Torres are on his house. Nothing there either. Stay on the office. If those suits come back out with Hawthorne, I want to know immediately. He hung up and dialed Eddie. The package get there. Dropped it with Trout 20 minutes ago, Eddie said. He was still in with Caleb. His partner took the envelope. Jack, the financial trail is clean and complete. 3 transactions, all traceable, all documented. The DA is going to have a very good day when this lands on his desk. You're sure it's solid, no gaps? I've done this before, Eddie said with a mild offense that Jack appreciated. There are no gaps. Good. Go home, Eddie. See your family. It's Christmas Eve, Eddie said. My family is at my mother-in-law's, and I would like to stay here as long as it's professionally justifiable. Despite everything, Jack almost laughed. Go, he said. He ended the call and stood for a moment in the parking lot with the cold working its way through his jacket, doing a rapid inventory of what they had and what they still needed. 19 bikes, winter clothing for 38. He needed toys, he needed food, he needed enough of everything to fill a building that had been emptied by fire and cruelty, and a man who called it a business decision. His phone rang before he could make the next call. Unknown number. He answered anyway. Mr. Dalton, a woman's voice, professional but with something underneath it, something tight and controlled that suggested the professional surface was operating under some strain. My name is Margaret Forsyth. I'm Victor Hawthorne's personal assistant. Jack said nothing. I understand that certain financial records may have been made available to the police, she said. Records that include my name as a signatory on an account. That's my understanding too, Jack said. A pause. I want to be very clear that I was not aware of the purpose of those transactions. I authorized them because Mr. Hawthorne instructed me to, as I do with all transactions of that type. I had no knowledge of the... She stopped herself. Then more quietly, I have a daughter. She's 11. I've been sick about this all morning. I saw the news and I knew... She stopped again. I want to cooperate, fully. I want to give a statement, but I needed to reach out to someone first to understand. Ms. Forsyth, Jack said, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not the police. I can't tell you what your legal exposure is. What I can tell you is that Officer Dennis Trout at the Silver Creek Police Department is a fair man who is going to be very interested in what you have to say. He paused. And I can tell you that the difference between being a witness and being a co-conspirator generally comes down to which side of the conversation you're on and how early you choose to be on it. A long silence. Thank you, she said. She hung up. Jack looked at his phone. The circle was tightening around Victor Hawthorne with a speed that felt almost cinematic, and Jack had been around long enough to know that real situations rarely move this cleanly. But sometimes the right pressure applied to the right points produced exactly this kind of cascade where one person's decision made the next person's decision easier until you had a chain reaction of truth-telling that became unstoppable. He called Trout. You're about to get another visitor, he said. Margaret Forsyth, Hawthorne's assistant. She's coming in voluntarily. A pause on Trout's end. How many people are you going to send through my door today, Jack? Hopefully that's the last one, Jack said. Do you have enough? Another pause, longer. The pause of a cop who is doing a careful assessment of what he has accumulated over the last 3 hours and what it adds up to. We're going to need the DA, Trout said finally. This is above my level now. But yeah, between the recording, the financial documentation, Caleb's statement, and if Forsyth comes in, yeah, we have enough to bring Hawthorne in for questioning. More than enough. A pause. We're going to move on him tonight. Jack felt the words land. Solid. Real. Merry Christmas, Dennis, he said. Don't push it, Trout said, but there was something in his voice that wasn't entirely unfriendly. Jack hung up. He turned to find Big Roy standing directly behind him, which given Roy's size should have been more alarming than it was. But Jack had gotten used to the way Roy materialized in spaces without announcement. "Tell me something good," Jack said. Roy held up his phone like a man presenting evidence. "Dave Kowalski at Flathead Toy Distribution is sending a truck. He said, tell you that, and I quote, I've been looking for an excuse to clear that warehouse before inventory, and God just handed me one. He's got stuffed animals, board games, action figures, art, supplies, books. Enough for probably 60 kids." Jack stared at him. 60? "He had a good year," Roy said. "What about food?" "Maria at the Mexican place on 2nd Street is calling her cousin who owns the Italian place, and between the two of them, they're putting together enough food for a sit-down dinner for 50 people. Said they'll have it ready by 5. Roy paused, and Pastor Gerald called back. Apparently, when he told his congregation what was happening, they started calling each other, and now he's got 17 church members driving to various stores right now, buying things off a list that Glennis Park from Brighthaven texted him. Jack was quiet for a moment. "Glennis is in on this?" "She called Gerald herself, apparently. Said she didn't know what you were planning, but she knew you were planning something and she wanted to help coordinate from the inside." Roy shrugged. "She sounds like a woman who gets things done." Jack thought about Evelyn Carter saying, "I'm not going to let him win." I thought about Glennis Park on the floor of a children's home, quietly building a network of support while her director was fighting for their future. He thought about Pete Okafor and Dave Kowalski and Pastor Gerald and Maria at the Mexican restaurant and 17 church members driving to stores in the snow on Christmas Eve. I thought about how the world looked from the outside when you rode in a group that made people cross the street, and how different it looked from the inside when you actually knew the people, and how those two pictures could be so completely different that they barely seemed to describe the same reality. "How many trucks do we have?" he said. "3 confirmed, 2 more probable," Roy said. "Jimmy's rounding up the guys who have pickups. I figure we show up at Brighthaven with everything we've got around 7 or 8 tonight. That gives them the whole evening to set it up for morning." Jack shook his head slowly. "No," he said. Roy looked at him. "We're not doing it tonight," Jack said. "We're doing it tomorrow. Christmas morning. We show up Christmas morning with everything at once. The kids wake up, they come downstairs, and it's there." He paused. "That's the moment that matters, not the setup. The moment they come through the door and see it." Roy was quiet for a second. "Then that means staging everything tonight somewhere they won't see it." "Gerald has a church hall," Jack said. "Big enough. We stage it there, all of us work through the night, and we move it to Brighthaven at dawn." Roy looked at him with an expression that Jack recognized as the particular look of a man who has known someone long enough to stop being surprised by them and has arrived instead at a steady, settled respect. "You thought this through," Roy said. "I'm thinking it through right now," Jack said honestly. Roy nodded. "I'll make the calls." He walked away, already dialing. Jack stood alone for a moment and let himself feel the weight of what was in motion. Not satisfaction, it was too early for satisfaction. And there were still things that could go wrong, and 38 children were still sitting in a building on Christmas Eve with nothing, but something adjacent to satisfaction. The particular feeling of a plan that has found its shape of pieces moving together in the right direction. Then his phone rang again. It was Cody. "Jack." Cody's voice had a different quality than it had during the earlier calls, tighter, faster, with the specific edge of someone reporting something they weren't expecting. "Hawthorne just came out of his office building. The 2 lawyers are with him. They got in the town car." Jack's whole body sharpened. "Which direction?" "West, toward Route 12. Route 12 headed toward the county line." Jack's jaw tightened. "You're following. From a distance. You want me to stay on them." He thought about it fast. Trout had said they were moving on Hawthorne tonight. If Hawthorne got to the county line before Trout moved, if he had money and a plan ready, if his lawyers had structured something, if he had assets across the state line that made disappearing a viable option, he called Trout. Immediately. "Hawthorne is in a vehicle headed west on Route 12, Jack said without preamble. "Town car black. He's got 2 lawyers with him. How fast can you move?" A sharp intake of breath on the other end. "We're not ready to, we need the DA to sign off." "Dennis?" Jack's voice was level and precise. "How long does it take to get to the county line at highway speed?" A pause. Very short. 22 minutes, Trout said. You have less than that. Move. He hung up. He called Cody. Stay on that car. Keep your distance and stay on it. Don't spook them. On it, Cody said. For the next 18 minutes, Jack stood in the parking lot of the Silver Creek Police Department and did nothing except watch the clock on his phone and breathe. He got updates from Cody every 3 minutes. The town car was still on Route 12, still heading west. Moving at normal highway speed, not panicked, not rushing the speed of men who believed they were in control of the situation and were making a calm, rational decision to improve their position. 12 minutes in, Cody said, there are police lights behind us. 2 cruisers, they're accelerating. Jack's eyes closed, just for a second. Pull off, Jack said. Pull off the road and let them pass. You've done what you need to do. They're pulling the town car over, Cody said. Jack, they got him. He's pulling over. The relief was physical. Jack felt it move through him from the center of his chest outward, a release of tension that he hadn't fully registered carrying until the moment it let go. Come back, he said. We've got work to do. The next call he made was to Evelyn Carter. She answered before the first ring finished, which meant she had been holding her phone and waiting, which meant Glennis had told her something was happening, and she had been sitting with it without enough information, which Jack recognized as one of the more difficult positions a person can occupy. They pulled him over, Jack said. He's in custody. It's not over there. Will be hearings, lawyers, a process, but he is not a free man tonight. And by the time his attorneys have him out of a room with the DA and the evidence that's been assembled today, he is going to understand very clearly that Brighthaven is not a property he is ever going to acquire. Silence on the line. Evelyn. Her voice when it came was barely above a whisper. I heard you. Are you okay? A pause. I'm standing in the corridor of my home, she said, and I'm looking at 38 children who spent today being braver than most adults I know, and I'm about to go tell them that the man who did this is going to face some consequences. Her voice steadied. Yeah, I'm okay. Then Jack, what you did today, I don't have the words for it. You don't need words for it, he said. Just keep those kids together and keep them up past their bedtime if you can. Christmas Eve, I think they can manage one late night. He paused. I have something I need to finish putting together. I'll be in touch. What are you? She stopped herself. He could hear the moment she decided to trust. Okay, she said. I'll keep them up. He hung up. He walked back to where Big Roy and 3 other members of the club had gathered and were looking at him with the focused, ready energy of men waiting for direction. Gerald's church hall, Jack said to Roy. He's opening it up right now. The first truck from Flathead is already on its way. Good. Jack looked at the group. Here's what we need tonight. We need to sort everything by age because every gift needs to go to the right child. Evelyn Carter has a list of those children, their ages, what they like. I need someone to get that list from her right now, and we work from it. Everything gets tagged before it goes in the trucks. He paused. And I need someone to find one specific thing. There's a little girl named Sophie Miller, 8 years old. She had a doll, a specific doll with dark brown eyes. Evelyn drove 40 minutes to find it. It was wrapped with Sophie's name on it. It burned in that building. His voice didn't change a register. I need someone to find that doll tonight. I don't care what it takes. It exists. Find it. The man Jack had addressed was Tommy Reeves, 26, who had grown up in Silver Creek and knew every store within a 50-mile radius and had the particular restless energy of someone who needed a precise, difficult task to feel most alive. He nodded immediately. I'll find it, Tommy said. I know you will, Jack said. They moved. What happened over the next several hours in the church hall at First Baptist Silver Creek was something that none of the men who participated in it would fully describe accurately afterward, not because they couldn't remember, but because the memory of it had a quality that resisted ordinary language. 41 people worked through the night inside that hall. 22 of them were Hell's Angels. The remaining 19 were church volunteers, the restaurant owners and their staff, Pete Okafor and his warehouse crew, Dave Kowalski and his driver, 3 members of the local fire department who had heard through a mutual contact what was happening and had shown up without being asked, and a retired school teacher named Agnes, who arrived at 9 p.m. with a casserole and stayed until 2 in the morning, helping sort gifts by age group, with the methodical efficiency of someone who had spent 30 years managing classroom logistics. Agnes and Jack ended up working side by side for the better part of an hour. She said at some point, without looking up from the box she was sorting, "You know what the funny thing is?" "What's that?" Jack said. "People in this town are scared of you. Your group, I mean. I see them cross the street. I've done it myself. I'm not going to lie about that." She paused, considering a stuffed elephant and setting it in the 4 to 6-year-old pile. "And here you are in a church hall on Christmas Eve sorting teddy bears by age group." Jack sorted a set of building blocks. "People are usually more than what they look like from across the street," he said. Agnes looked at him. "I'm going to remember that," she said. At 11:47 p.m., Tommy Reeves walked through the door of the church hall. He was carrying a box. He held it up as he walked across the room, and the hall got quieter in the way that rooms do when enough people notice something at once. And Jack looked at him and at the box and said, "Is that—" "Specialty toy store," Tommy said, slightly out of breath. 52 miles. They were closing. I knocked on the window for 6 minutes until someone answered. He held the box out. Dark brown eyes. The hair does that thing where it never quite sits right. Exactly like the one that burned. Jack took the one. He held it for a moment, turning it over in his hands, and felt something move through him that he didn't try to name. "Good work," he said. Tommy nodded. Then he sat down on the nearest folding chair and didn't move for about 5 minutes, which was understandable, given that he had just driven 104 miles in the dark on Christmas Eve for a doll. The sorting continued. By 3 in the morning, they had everything. 38 complete gift sets organized and tagged with names. Bikes assembled. Pete had brought 2 of his warehouse guys who happened to be mechanical, and they had worked through the assembly with impressive speed. Coats, hats, gloves, boots in every size. Toys and books and games. A full Christmas dinner ready to be reheated and served. And one box sitting separate from everything else with a tag on it that said Sophie in handwriting that Jack had done himself because he had found at some point in the night that he wanted to be the one to write her name. He stood back and looked at what they had built. 41 people who had no particular reason to be in the same room together, who had come from different parts of the same community and brought different things and worked through the night without complaint and had produced from nothing a Christmas morning. Roy came to stand beside him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Roy said, "We're going to need to be there by 6 before the kids wake up." "I know," Jack said. "So we've got about 2 hours." "I know that too." Roy looked at him. "You should sleep." "I'll sleep after," Jack said. "I was thinking about the morning, about trucks pulling up in the dark before the sun came up, and the careful, quiet work of moving everything into place before 38 children came downstairs." He was thinking about the particular magic of walking into a room that has been transformed while you slept, and how that transformation lands differently when you have experienced the absence of it. When you know what it feels like to expect nothing and receive nothing. I was thinking about a 9-year-old version of himself in a group home in another state, and the particular weight of a December morning that arrived without announcement and without ceremony and moved through you like water through an empty vessel. He was thinking about Sophie Miller and her dark, watchful eyes and the way Evelyn had described her, pressing her back against her bedroom door to guard her belongings. He picked up the box with Sophie's name on it and held it in his lap. He sat on a folding chair in a church hall, surrounded by the aftermath of a night's work and the soft sounds of men resting against walls and on floors, and he held that box and he waited for the morning to come. 2 hours and 11 minutes later, his alarm went off. He stood up. He said in a voice just loud enough to carry through the hall, "Let's go." 41 people got to their feet. The trucks were loaded in 35 minutes. They moved out in Convoy 3 trucks, 12 bikes loaded in the truck beds and on trailers, and behind them a line of motorcycles that stretched the length of the block. Jack rode at the front. The cold was deep and complete, and the snow was fresh on the ground, and there was not yet any light in the sky. Glennis Park was waiting at the back entrance of Bright Haven when they pulled up. She had the door open before they reached it. She looked at the convoy, the trucks, the bikes, the men who had climbed out and were already moving with quiet efficiency, and her hand went to her mouth. "How?" she said. It was not really a question. Jack handed her Sophie's box first. "This goes to Sophie Miller," he said. "Nobody else touches it. It goes directly from your hands to hers." Glennis took it. She held it and looked at him. Mr. Dalton, she said. Jack. Jack. She steadied her voice. Thank you. Where do you want the bikes, he said. She laughed. It came out slightly broken and entirely real, the laugh of a woman who has been awake all night and holding things together and has just had the structural support she needed arrive at her back door at 5:30 in the morning. Follow me, she said. They worked fast and quiet. Every man knew his role. The children's rooms were in the front of the building, far enough from the back that the sound of movement didn't carry, and the staff had been quietly preparing the main common room since midnight, pushing furniture, laying out the space, creating something that could receive what was coming. By 6:45, everything was in place. 38 gift sets arranged in the common room, each one marked with a name, the bikes lined up along the far wall, the coats hanging in a row, the food in the kitchen ready to go. The room smelled like pine and cold air, and something that wasn't quite identifiable, but that everyone who walked through it registered somewhere below the level of language as the smell of something being made right. Jack stood in the doorway of that room and looked at it. Glennis came to stand beside him. What time do they usually wake up, he said. First one's up by 7, she said. Darnell, he's an early riser. Jack nodded. He looked at his watch. 7 minutes. I want to be outside when they come in, he said. All of us. We shouldn't be in here when they first see it. It's not our moment. Glennis looked at him. That's very thoughtful, she said. It's their Christmas, he said simply. We just helped with the logistics. He gathered his men, and they went outside, all of them standing in the cold in front of Bright Haven Children's, home in the early morning dark, their breath-making clouds, nobody talking. Jack stood at the front with his hands in his jacket pockets and listened to the quiet. Then from inside the building he heard it, a sound. Not a voice, not words, just a sound. The kind of sound a child makes when they walk through a door and encounter something that exceeds every expectation they had carefully managed down to the smallest possible size. A sound that has no name in adult language, because adults have mostly learned to protect themselves from feelings that size a sound that is pure and involuntary and real in the way that only a very few things in a human life are ever completely real. Then another sound, and another, and then it wasn't possible to distinguish individual sounds anymore because the building was full of it. This wall of children's voices rising all at once, and even from outside in the cold you could feel it in your chest. Big Roy made a sound of his own. He tried to disguise it as clearing his throat and did not succeed. Nobody mentioned it. Jack stood very still and let the sound wash over him and fill the places inside him that had been empty for a very long time. Then the back door opened and Evelyn Carter came out. She stood in front of him in the early morning cold and looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Her eyes were red and her face had the particular expression of someone who has arrived somewhere they weren't sure they were going to reach. Then she said, "She's holding the doll." Her voice broke on the last word, just slightly. Jack nodded. "Sophie," Evelyn said. "She's holding it like..." She stopped, pressed her lips together, steadied herself. "She hasn't put it down. She came through the door and she saw her name on the box and she opened it and she's been holding it since." Jack said nothing. "She asked me," Evelyn said, her voice very careful now, "who did this? And I told her some people who cared. And she said..." She stopped again. She said, "Are they going to leave?" And I said I didn't know. And she said, "Can I go say thank you before they do?" Jack heard the question embedded in that. "We're not going anywhere," he said. "Not yet." Evelyn looked at him. Then she stepped back and held the door open. And Sophie Miller came through it. 8 years old, blonde hair that was always slightly tangled, dark brown eyes that were always watching, always calculating, always braced for the thing that didn't come through. She was holding the doll. She stopped in front of Jack Dalton, this large, weathered man in a leather jacket who was easily 5 times her size, and looked up at him with those dark, steady eyes. He crouched down to her level. She said, "Did you find my doll?" "Someone on my team did," he said. "He drove a long way to find it." She looked at the doll, then back at him. "How did you know which one?" "Evelyn told us what it looked like," he said. "We wanted to get it right." Sophie processed this for a moment with the grave, unhurried deliberation of a child who takes things seriously. Then she said, "Nobody ever came back for me before." The words landed in the cold morning air with a weight that had nothing to do with their length. Jack held her gaze. He didn't look away. He didn't fill the silence with something easier than what she had just said. I know what that feels like, he said, and that was the truest thing he said all day. Sophie looked at him for one long moment. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around him, around as much of him as her arms could reach, which was not very much, and held on. Jack put one hand on her back. I didn't say it's okay. He didn't say everything is fine. He had learned over 52 years of a complicated life that the most respectful thing you can do for a person's pain is to stay in it with them instead of rushing them out of it. He just held on. Behind him, not one of his men made a sound. But Big Roy was definitely not clearing his throat this time, and nobody said a word about it, and that was exactly as it should be. Sophie let go first. That was the thing Jack would remember most clearly years later, when he tried to describe that morning to people who asked. Not the moment she put her arms around him, though that moment had its own weight, its own particular gravity, but the moment she let go. Because she stepped back and looked at him with those dark, steady eyes, and she wasn't crying. She had the expression of a child who has just received a piece of information they have been waiting a long time to receive, and who is now quietly updating everything they previously believed about how the world works. She said, "Are you going to be here for breakfast?" Jack looked at her. He had not planned for breakfast. He had planned for the morning drop, the handoff, the quiet exit that men like him generally preferred. Do the work. Don't make it about yourself. Ride away before it becomes something complicated. That was the plan. He looked at Sophie. He looked at Evelyn, who was standing just behind her in the doorway, watching him with an expression that was not quite a smile but was doing the same work as one. Yeah, Jack said. We can stay for breakfast. Sophie nodded, apparently satisfied. She turned and went back inside the doll, still tucked firmly under her arm, with the decisive walk of a small person who has accomplished what she came out to accomplish. Evelyn held the door open. She's been like that all morning, she said quietly as Jack straightened up. Decisive, like she made a decision about something and she's operating from it now. What kind of decision, Jack said. Evelyn considered it. I think she decided to trust us, she said. Really trust. Not the cautious, provisional kind she's been doing since she got here. The real kind. She paused. That's not a small thing for a child who has been failed as many times as she has. No, Jack said, it's not. He turned back to his men, who were standing in a loose group in the cold, with the collective energy of people who have been working through the night and are now arriving at the strange suspended state between exhaustion and momentum, where the body hasn't decided yet which way to fall. We're staying for breakfast, he said. Nobody objected. Big Roy said, thank God, because Maria packed enough food for approximately 70 people, and I have been smelling it for 6 hours. Someone laughed. Then a few more. Then most of them standing in the thin early morning light of Christmas Day. The sound of it mixing with the noise still coming from inside the building, and it was the most natural sound in the world. They went inside. What happened in the common room of Brighthaven Children's Home in the next 2 hours was something that Glennis Park later described as the only time in her 11 years there that she completely forgot to manage anything. She just stood in the corner and watched it happen and did not intervene, because there was nothing to intervene and everything was already going exactly right. 38 children and 41 adults in one room, and the division between them dissolved faster than anyone expected. Not because anyone engineered it, but because children are not encumbered by the same social calculations that adults carry, and a man in a leather jacket sitting on the floor. Helping you put together a toy truck is just a man sitting on the floor helping you, and that's all he needs to be. Darnell, who had asked 3 times about the bike, and had spent the morning circling his with the reverent energy of someone who cannot quite believe it is real, eventually climbed on it in the corridor outside the common room, with the help of a man named Torres, who held the back of the seat and ran alongside him for the first 3 passes until Darnell said, with a breathless confidence that arrived out of nowhere, I got it, let go, and Torres let go, and Darnell did in fact have it. Torres came back into the common room, slightly out of breath, grinning in the way a grown man grins when he has just participated in someone else's first time doing something, and sat down next to Jimmy and said nothing, and nobody had to ask why he looked like that because it was obvious. Jack sat on the floor in the corner of the room with his back against the wall and watched it all. He had a cup of coffee that Maria's cousin had produced from the kitchen, and he drank it slowly and let himself simply be present in the room without needing to do or manage anything. A boy named Marcus, 12, quite the kind of kid who observed more than he spoke, came and sat next to him. Not right next to him, 2 feet of respectful distance. He sat with his knees up and a book in his lap and didn't say anything for several minutes. Then he said without looking up, "My dad had a Harley." Jack looked at him. "He let me sit on it once," Marcus said, before he stopped. Turned a page in the book he wasn't reading. "Before," Jack said. "What kind?" "Mine." "Fat boy," Marcus said. "Black." "Good bike," Jack said. Marcus nodded. Another silence. "Then do you think it's weird that the thing I miss most isn't him? It's sitting on the bike. Is that bad?" Jack thought about the question seriously because it deserved a serious answer. "No," he said. "Memory works through objects a lot of the time. You're not missing the bike. You're missing the feeling of being next to him. The bike is just the shape that feeling lives in." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That makes sense," he said. They sat together for a while without speaking, and it was the companionable silence of two people who understand each other well enough not to need to fill the space. Evelyn moved through the room, doing what she always did, reading it, attending to the undercurrents, noticing who needed something before they asked for it. She paused in front of Jack at one point, looked at him and Marcus sitting together against the wall and said nothing. Just looked. Then she moved on, and the look she carried with her was one Jack would carry with him for a long time. At 8:45, her phone rang. She answered it in the corridor and came back 2 minutes later with an expression on her face that was different enough from the one she'd been wearing that Jack noticed it immediately. He stood up. She crossed the room to him, keeping her voice low, keeping her face controlled. "That was Patricia Cho," she said. "My lawyer." "What's happening?" "Victor Hawthorne was brought in for questioning last night. He has been there since approximately midnight. The DA has been in the building since 6 this morning." She paused. "Patricia says the DA has reviewed everything, the recording, the financial records, Caleb's statement, Margaret Forsyth's statement, and they are filing charges. Today." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "Arson, conspiracy. And because it involved a facility for children, there are enhancement charges that make the whole thing significantly more serious." She looked at him. "His lawyers are trying to negotiate, but apparently the DA is not in a negotiating mood." Jack let that settle. "Is he getting out today?" he said. "Patricia says it's unlikely," Evelyn said. "The judge on call is someone named Breckenridge, who has a particular history with cases involving crimes against children. She is apparently not known for generosity with bail in circumstances like these." Jack nodded slowly. "And the property," he said, "Bright Haven. With criminal charges pending any civil pressure campaign, Hawthorne's been running effectively stalls. Patricia says we should have a clear period, potentially a very long clear period, to operate without interference." Evelyn's voice finally broke on the last word, just slightly, a single crack in the surface that she smoothed over immediately. "She said we're safe, Jack. For the first time in 2 years, she said we're actually safe." He looked at her. She was holding it together the way she always held it together, the straight spine, the controlled breathing, the absolute refusal to fully come apart in a space where children might see it. But her eyes were doing something that eyes do when the thing a person has been fighting for finally arrives and the body recognizes it before the mind catches up. "Good," he said. Simple, quiet. She said, "I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," he said. "You opened the door." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she turned and walked back into the room. Because there were 38 children who needed their Christmas morning, and she was not a woman who stood still when there were people who needed her. And Jack understood that about her because it was the same thing that got him out of bed in the morning and always had been. He went and found Roy. "Hawthorne's being charged," he said quietly. Roy didn't say anything for a moment. "Then how do you feel?" "The same," Jack said, which was honest. The legal process was the legal process. He had seen it work, and he had seen it fail, and he didn't assign it more importance than it deserved. What mattered was what had already happened in this building this morning. What mattered was Darnell on his bike, and Marcus talking about a fat boy, and Sophie with her doll pressed against her chest, like something she was not going to let go of again. The charges were the right ending for Hawthorne, but they were not the story. The story was already in this room. At 10 o'clock, a knock came at the front door of Bright Haven. Glennis answered it. She came back into the common room looking slightly puzzled. "There are people outside," she said. "A lot of them. I don't know where they came from." Jack went to the front window and looked. The street in front of Bright Haven was filling with people. Not in an organized way, not a crowd that had been assembled, but the kind of gathering that happens when a story moves through a small town's network of people who know each other and call each other, and word travels the way word travels in a community that has been paying attention. There were maybe 40 people on the sidewalk, then 50, then more. Some of them were holding things, bags, boxes, wrapped gifts that had clearly been pulled from under their own trees and brought here. One woman was carrying what appeared to be a homemade cake. An older man in a veteran's hat was holding a box of winter clothes. A family with 3 small children of their own had apparently brought their children's extra gifts, the ones they had duplicates of, and were standing on the sidewalk in a row looking at the building with the kind of purpose that people carry when they have decided to do something that feels right. Glennis said behind him, "What do I do?" "Open the door," Jack said. She opened it. What came through that door over the next 45 minutes was the accumulation of a community that had been watching the news and feeling helpless, and had now found the shape that help could take. People who didn't know each other introduced themselves on the doorstep. A retired teacher whose name Jack never caught pressed his hand when she came in and said, "Only tell your people thank you." A young couple, mid-20s, the woman visibly pregnant, came in with 2 bags of toys and looked around the room at the children and the men in leather jackets all occupying the same space together, and the woman said to her husband in a voice that wasn't quite low enough, "I want our baby to grow up in a town that does this." Jack heard it. He didn't say anything, but he heard it. Dennis Trout arrived at 10:40 not in uniform, which meant he was there as a person and not as a cop, and he stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the room before he found Jack. "Hawthorne is being processed," he said without preamble. "Formally charged. First appearance is the day after tomorrow. Judge Breckenridge." He paused. She was not in a bail-granting mood. "I heard," Jack said. Trout looked at him for a moment, the look of a man doing a quiet internal accounting. "I want to say something," Trout said. "You don't have to." "I want to." He paused, choosing his words with care. "What you did, the way you found Caleb, the way you got him to talk, the recording, bringing Forsyth in, I'm not going to ask how exactly you did any of that. And I want you to understand that me not asking is a deliberate choice because some things work better when I don't have all the details." He met Jack's eyes. "But I want you to know that none of what happened today in that police station happens without what you did first. And I am aware of that." Jack nodded. "Appreciate it." "Don't make a habit of it," Trout said. But there was no real heat behind it. He looked around the room. "This is something, though, this right here." "Yeah," Jack said. "Silver Creek did this," Trout said. "The whole town, not just you." "That's exactly right," Jack said. "That's exactly what happened." Trout stayed for 20 minutes, which Jack suspected was longer than he had planned. He ended up sitting at a table with 4 of the children playing a board game that someone had brought, and he had the slightly sheepish expression of a man who had sat down for a moment and then became genuinely absorbed in what he was doing and lost track of time, which was the most human thing Jack had seen him do. Sophie found Jack again at 11. She had been moving through the room all morning, like a small supervisor checking on things, watching how people interacted, occasionally making pronouncements in the serious tone that Jack was beginning to understand was simply her natural register. She sat down next to him on the bench along the wall and put the doll in her lap and looked at him. "You grew up without parents too," she said. It was not a question. Jack looked at her. "How did you know that?" "Because of how you talked to me," she said simply. "Grown-ups who had parents usually try to say things like, 'It's going to be okay and you'll find a family.' You don't say those things. You talk to me like..." She paused, searching for the word with the precision of a child who has a very specific thing she wants to say and will not settle for an approximation. "Like you know what it actually is, not what people want it to be." Jack was quiet for a moment. "I grew up in a group home," he said. "Different state. Long time ago, but yeah." Sophie nodded as though this confirmed something. "Did it get better?" she said. He considered lying. Not a mean lie, a comfortable one, the kind adults tell children to protect them from a complexity that will resolve itself with time anyway. He considered it and discarded it because Sophie Miller had a detector for comfortable lies that was more sophisticated than most adults he'd met, and she deserved better. "It got different," he said. "There were hard parts for a long time, but then I found people I chose who chose me back. And that changed everything." He paused, Family doesn't always look like what you're told it's supposed to look like. Sometimes it's people who just show up consistently, over time, and that turns into something real. Sophie thought about this seriously. Like Evelyn, she said. Like Evelyn, he agreed. And you showed up today, she said. We did. She looked at the doll, then back at him. Are you going to show up again? The question was so direct and so precisely aimed at the thing that mattered most. Not what happened today, but what happened after the thing. Children in Sophie's position had been burned by so many times the promise that fated the adult who meant it in the moment and then didn't follow through, that Jack felt it go through him like a current. He thought carefully about what he could honestly promise. I don't know what that looks like yet, he said, but I'll tell you what I know. Evelyn knows how to reach for me now, and if she calls, I answer. That I can promise you. Sophie studied him. Okay, she said. Then she said, your friend cried. Jack blinked. Who? The big one. She nodded toward Big Roy, who was across the room currently engaged in what appeared to be a highly competitive card game with Darnell and two other boys. His massive frame hunched over the table with the focused intensity of a man who was taking this very seriously. When you were talking to me outside this morning, he cried. I'll make sure he never finds out you told me that, Jack said. Sophie's face did something that wasn't quite a smile, but was the closest thing to unguarded that he had seen from her. The face underneath the watchful face, and it was luminous in the way that children's real faces always are when they surface. Then she got up, tucked the doll under her arm, and walked away to find something else that needed her attention. Jack sat with the moment. He let himself sit with it fully without rushing past it, without immediately converting it into what came next. He just sat with it. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, a number he didn't recognize. He answered, Mr. Dalton. A man's voice. Formal. Slightly stiff in the way of people who are accustomed to being on the powerful end of conversations and are finding the current arrangement unfamiliar. My name is Arthur Penfield. I'm senior partner at Penfield and Associates. We represent Victor Hawthorne. Jack said nothing. I'll be direct, Penfield said. My client is facing some significant legal exposure at this moment. In the interest of resolving the situation as efficiently as possible, he has authorized me to reach out with a proposal. Jack said, I'm listening. Mr. Hawthorne is prepared to make a substantial financial contribution to Brighthaven Children's Home. We're talking about a figure significant enough to fund the facility's operations for a minimum of 5 years, possibly more. New building, updated facilities. Endowment. A pause. In exchange, we would ask that Ms. Carter and her organization refrain from making public statements about the events of the past several days, and that any informal parties who may have been involved in gathering evidence decline to be cited as sources in any media coverage. Jack sat very still. He understood exactly what this was. Hawthorne in a room with his lawyers, the charges filed the morning gone, in a way that could not be undone, pivoting to the one tool he had always relied on and would apparently keep reaching for until the last possible second. Money. The offer was not nothing. 5 years of operational funding for a facility that ran on the constant edge of inadequacy that turned down children because it didn't have the capacity that depended on bake sales and donation drives and the generosity of a community that was itself struggling. 5 years of certainty for 38 children who had never experienced certainty about anything. It was not nothing. Jack said, Mr. Penfield, do you have children? A pause, surprised. I have 2 daughters, Penfield said carefully. Then I want you to think about something, Jack said. I want you to think about what you would feel honestly if someone burned your daughter's Christmas morning. Not what you would do legally, what you would feel. He paused. And then I want you to pass a message to your client. Go ahead, Penfield said, with the professional neutrality of a man who has heard many things in many rooms. Tell him that the answer is no, Jack said. Tell him that the money, all of it, 5 years worth, cannot buy the silence of a community that watched him do what he did. Tell him that the story of what happened at Brighthaven on December 23rd and December 25th, 2001 is going to be told in this town for as long as this town exists, and his name is going to be a permanent part of it. And tell him, Jack paused, and he was careful with this part, precise and deliberate. Tell him that the best thing he can do for himself now is cooperate fully with the DA and stop making this worse. A long silence on the line. Then Penfield said carefully, I'll pass along the message. He hung up. Jack looked at his phone for a moment. Then he stood up, crossed the room, and found Evelyn. Hawthorne's lawyer just called me, he said quietly. Evelyn's face sharpened immediately. What did he want? Jack told her. He told her the offer exactly without softening or inflating any part of it. Evelyn listened with the focused, still attention she gave to everything important. And when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. He watched her think. He watched her weigh it, genuinely weigh it, because she was not a person who made decisions from ego, and the offer was real money that could do real good for real children. And she was someone who had spent 25 years making hard trade-offs with limited resources. He watched her do the honest arithmetic of it. Then she said no. Just like that, he said. Just like that. She met his eyes. He burned Sophie's doll. He burned Darnell's bike. He burned the coat I picked out for a 7-year-old named Lucas, who has never in his life owned a winter coat that fit him properly. Her voice was steady and absolute. There is no number on a check that changes what he did, and there is no number that buys my silence about it, because what happened here, all of it, including today, needs to be known. It needs to be a story that people tell. She paused. The money he's offering, will get that money from people who give it because they want to, not because they're trying to make something go away. And it will mean something different. It will mean something true. Jack looked at her. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. And that was the end of Victor Hawthorne's last attempt to buy his way out of what he had done. The rest of Christmas Day moved in the way of days that are lived fully, quickly in memory, slowly in the experience of them, each moment carrying more weight than it seemed to in the moment, and revealing its full weight only later. Maria's food came out at noon, and it was abundant in the way that food cooked by someone who takes feeding people seriously is always abundant, the kind of meal that produces silence in a room of children because they are too focused on eating to maintain conversation. Big Roy ate 4 plates. Nobody commented. Agnes, the retired school teacher who had stayed until 2 in the morning, sorting gifts, and then apparently gone home, slept for 5 hours and come back, sat next to Evelyn through most of lunch, and the two of them talked in the quiet, flowing way of women who have found they understand each other faster than usual. Jack caught fragments of it. Agnes had been a teacher for 30 years, had watched the town change, had opinions about what communities owed each other that aligned closely with Evelyn's. He suspected that a friendship was being built that would outlast this day by decades. Cody found him around 2 in the afternoon. He had been outside making calls, following up on the logistical threads of the day, making sure the remaining trucks had returned their borrowed equipment, making sure Eddie was compensated for the time he'd put in, making sure the men who had worked through the night had eaten and weren't driving home in a state that concerned him. Cody said, Channel 7 is outside, news van, reporter named Schaefer. Jack looked at him. What do they want? What do you think they want? Cody said. The story. The whole thing, the fire, the charges, the angels showing up with bikes on Christmas morning. They want to talk to you. Jack thought about it. He thought about what it would mean for the club, for the story, for the way it got told. He thought about what Evelyn had said. It needs to be a story that people tell. Tell them I'll come out in 10 minutes, he said. Cody raised an eyebrow. I know, Jack said. Just 10 minutes. He found Evelyn first. News crew outside, he said. You should be the one they talk to. It's your home. Your story. Evelyn shook her head. It's all of our story. They should talk to both of us. She paused. And Sophie. Jack looked at her. She's 8. She'll want to, Evelyn said with complete certainty. Trust me. She was right. Sophie, when asked, tilted her head and said, okay, with the same decisive energy she brought to everything, and the 3 of them. Jack Dalton, Evelyn Carter, and Sophie Miller with her doll stood outside Brighthaven Children's Home on Christmas Day in the cold Montana air and spoke to a reporter named Schaefer, who had the good sense to mostly stay out of the way and let the story tell itself. The footage that aired that night on Channel 7 was the kind of footage that travels the specific quality of image and sound that moves beyond local news and into the larger story of what human beings do for each other when they decide to. It showed the line of motorcycles. It showed the children. It showed Big Roy caught off guard by the camera, who froze for a moment and then composed himself with the dignity of a large man who was not going to let the camera see him be affected by anything and then was completely visibly affected by everything. It showed Sophie. In the footage, the reporter asked her what Christmas meant to her. Sophie considered the question for a moment, that deliberate, grave consideration, and then said, I used to think it was about presence, but I think it's actually about people who show up when you didn't expect them to. The reporter didn't say anything for a moment after that. Neither did Jack. Evelyn put her hand on Sophie's shoulder, and Sophie didn't flinch. And that small thing, that absence of flinching from a child who had been flinching for years, was the realest thing in any of the footage, though nobody who watched it could have articulated exactly why it affected them as deeply as it did. The story ran locally that night. By December 26th, it had been picked up by 2 regional networks. By December 28th, it was national. The phones at Bright Haven rang for 2 weeks without stopping. Donations came in from 31 states. Letters, care packages. A foundation in Boston contacted Evelyn about a grant that she had been applying for unsuccessfully for 4 years, and that suddenly found its approval process accelerated. A contractor in Helena reached out to say he wanted to build the new storage facility at cost, which meant nearly nothing, and bring his crew of 12 on a Saturday in February. Evelyn handled all of it with the same methodical, unflappable efficiency she brought to everything, and the only time Glennis saw her cry during any of it was the afternoon a package arrived from an anonymous sender in Ohio, a woman based on the handwriting containing 38 handmade Christmas ornaments, each one labeled with a name and a note that said simply, I saw the story. I know all their names now. I thought they should each have something that proved it. All 38 names. Glennis found Evelyn at her kitchen table with the ornaments spread out in front of her and the note in her hand, and she sat down and didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that would be more than what the moment already contained. Victor Hawthorne's legal proceedings moved through the following year with the slow, grinding momentum of cases that have substantial evidence and well-funded defendants who fight every step. His lawyers were as good as his money could buy, and they were very good. But the recording was the recording, and Caleb's testimony was what it was, and Margaret Forsyth proved to be a remarkably precise and credible witness who had apparently kept documentation of her own that his lawyers had not anticipated. He did not acquire Bright Haven. He did not acquire any property in Silver Creek. He spent 18 months in legal proceedings that cost him more in attorney's fees than the land he had wanted would ever have been worth. And in the final hearing before the judge rendered her decision on sentencing, Evelyn Carter was given the opportunity to make a statement. She stood at the podium in a courtroom in Billings on a Tuesday in March and spoke for 4 minutes. She did not speak about herself. She did not speak about the fire or the money or the legal process. She spoke about Sophie Miller and Darnell and Lucas and a 4-year-old named Maya who had gotten a stuffed giraffe on Christmas morning and had not let go of it since. She spoke about what it meant to be a child who had already been failed by the world and to be failed again deliberately by a man who looked at 38 human beings in their most vulnerable years and calculated that their suffering was an acceptable cost of doing business. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She simply told the truth with the precision and weight of someone who has spent 25 years learning how to make the truth land where it needs to land. When she finished, the courtroom was quiet in the way of rooms in which something has just been said that no amount of legal procedure can fully process. Judge Breckenridge looked at Victor Hawthorne for a long moment. Then she handed down a sentence that his lawyers immediately began appealing. They did not succeed. Jack heard about the sentencing from Dennis Trout, who called him because he had come over the preceding months to operate in a way that acknowledged the role Jack had played without ever requiring them to formalize what that relationship was or what it meant. They were not friends exactly. They were 2 men in the same town who understood each other better than the external categories suggested they should, and who had each decided that understanding was more useful than category. It's done, Trout said. Yeah, Jack said. How do you feel? Jack thought about it. The same, he said, which was still honest. The verdict was right. The verdict was what it was supposed to be. But what had mattered had already happened on Christmas morning, and it had happened in the lived moment of it, and no legal outcome could add to or subtract from what had occurred in that room with those children on that day. The same isn't a bad way to feel, Trout said. No, Jack said. It's not. In April, Bright Haven held a small ceremony for the completion of the new storage building. The contractor from Helena finished ahead of schedule, which he attributed to his crew working every weekend for 6 weeks because, as he told Evelyn, none of us wanted this to be the job we dragged our feet on. The building was larger than the original, properly insulated, with a security system that the local alarm company had installed at no charge. Evelyn cut a ribbon with a pair of scissors someone had wrapped in gold paper as a joke, and people laughed, and Sophie stood next to her, holding the doll. And the day was cold, but clear, and the light was the particular gold of a Montana spring afternoon. Jack was there. He had not been sure he would come. Not because he didn't want to, but because men like him had a complicated relationship with ceremonies, with the formal acknowledgement of things, with standing in front of people in a context that required him to be seen in a particular way. He was better at doing than at being thanked for doing. But Evelyn had called him personally, not to persuade him, just to say, "I hope you'll be here." Sophie asked if you were coming. He was there. Sophie found him immediately upon arrival with the directional precision she always brought to finding him, and stood next to him through most of the ceremony without saying anything. At one point, she slipped her hand into his without preamble or ceremony, the way children do things without negotiating, without asking, simply because they want to, and they have decided it is allowed. He held on. At the end of the ceremony, Evelyn spoke briefly. She thanked the contractor, the community, the donors. She thanked Agnes by name, which made Agnes press her hand flat against her chest in a way that suggested she was managing something strong. She thanked Caleb Ross, which surprised people who didn't know the whole story, and she explained it simply. He had made a wrong choice and then made a right one, and the right one had mattered, and she believed in acknowledging both. Then she looked at Jack. She didn't deliver a speech about him. She didn't list what he had done or turn him into a symbol. She just looked at him and said, "You showed up, and you kept showing up. That's the whole thing. That's everything." He nodded once. It was enough. What Silver Creek remembered about the winter of 2001 changed over the years, the way memory always changes, softening at certain edges, sharpening at others, losing some details and preserving others with inexplicable fidelity. But certain things stayed fixed in the way of things that have calcified into the identity of a place. People remembered the fire. They remembered that a man in a $1,000 suit had looked at 38 children who had nothing and decided to take what little they had. They remembered that he had not gotten away with it. And they remembered this, especially this, most of all, the sound of motorcycle engines in the early morning dark of Christmas Day, and what had come off those trucks and what had been built in a church hall through the night by men who wore leather jackets and had complicated histories, and who never once in any of the years that followed let the children of Bright Haven spend a Christmas without being remembered. Jack Dalton never called himself a hero. He would not have accepted the word and would have found a direct but not unkind way to return it to whoever offered it. He was a man who had grown up without people to show up for him, and who had spent his adult life quietly making sure that the people around him did not experience the same absence. He did not do it for recognition. He did not do it because it was easy. He did it because it was the only honest response he knew to the thing that had been done to him, and to the children he had been, and to the children who kept being born into the same spaces of abandonment that he had survived. Sophie Miller grew up at Bright Haven. She aged out of the system at 18 and was the first child in the home's history to receive a scholarship specifically endowed by Bright Haven's donor community, a scholarship that Evelyn had quietly established in the years following 2001, funded by the wave of national attention that had come from A Christmas Story that traveled further than anyone expected. She studied social work. She came back to Silver Creek. She worked at Bright Haven for 3 years and then became the youngest director of a children's home in the state of Montana at 27. On her first day as director, she put a framed photograph on her desk. Not of her own family, because the concept of family had taken a shape in her life that did not fit neatly into a photograph, but of Christmas morning 2001, a photo that a staff member had taken without anyone asking her, to a photo of a large man in a leather jacket crouching down in the snow outside a building, while an 8-year-old girl in a coat that was slightly too big for her put her arms as far around him as they would go. Sophie kept that photograph on every desk she ever sat behind for the rest of her career. Not as a memorial, not as a reminder of what had been lost, as a reminder of what showed up to replace it. Because the truest thing she had learned on that Christmas morning and relearned in every year that followed, was not that the world was kind, or that justice always arrived, or that the right people always showed up in time. The truest thing was simpler and more durable than any of that. Sometimes when everything has been burned down to nothing and the night is cold, and you are a child standing at the edge of a loss too large to comprehend. The sound you hear in the distance is not silence. It is engines, and they are coming for you, and they will not stop until they find you, and they will not leave until you know all the way down in the place where children keep the things they cannot say that you were worth showing up for. That was the story Silver Creek told. That is the story Silver Creek will always tell.